Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. If you've been paying attention to the headlines lately, you know that it's been one of those weeks where just about everything that could go sideways did, from record-breaking storms hammering the Caribbean to more drama in DC that might leave millions without basic food aid, then to tech problems that remind us how easily our world can grind to a halt with just one single point of failure. And today we're going to break all this down. We're going to go over what all of it means for regular folks like us, and then also practical steps that we can all take to be more prepared. First up, we have a major storm that's been dominating the weather maps all week, and that's Hurricane Melissa. As of this week, Melissa has officially entered the record books as one of the strongest storms the Caribbean has ever seen, topping out as a Category 5 with sustained winds of up to or over 175 miles per hour. If you were watching the forecast over the past few days, you might have noticed the classic spaghetti model anxiety as every news outlet tried to guess where this thing was headed. Florida was on high alert for a little while, but the latest track shows Melissa is probably going to miss the mainland U.S. altogether. But just because a storm misses the U.S. doesn't mean that it's not worth paying attention to. There's always something that we can learn, regardless of where we live. But first, let's talk about who is getting hit. Right now, as I'm recording this on Tuesday morning, Jamaica is right in Melissa's path. They'll be dealing with powerful wind, a storm surge expected to be at least 9 to 13 feet along the southern coast, and a ton of rain. Some parts of Jamaica could see up to 40 inches by the time all this mess is said and done. Then landslides and flash floods are also likely. To put all that in perspective, over 70% of the country's population lives along the coastline, and Jamaican officials have opened up more than 800 shelters. It's also worth noting that Melissa will go down as the first Category 5 hurricane to threaten Jamaica in recorded history. So it just goes to show that just because a particular area has been spared from the worst historically, that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen eventually. But even if most of us don't see the worst of this, storms like Melissa offer a few big reminders. First, rapid intensification is the new normal. Melissa exploded into a monster storm thanks to warmer than usual ocean water, and we're seeing this happen more and more. Storms ramping up from like something small to Category 4 or 5 in just a couple of days. So that means that the old wait and see approach doesn't really cut it anymore. If you live in a hurricane zone, you need to have your supplies and evacuation plans lined out before hurricane season even starts. Next, don't trust the cone. Early forecasts show that Florida could be in danger, and that's not really the case anymore. It only took one shift in the models for the entire state to go from panic mode to never mind, but it could go the other way too. Just because a storm looks like it's going to miss you today, that doesn't mean that you're going to be out of the woods tomorrow. So be ready to move if you're in the possible path, even if it feels like a false alarm. Then it also showed the importance of community and local action. The response in Jamaica ranged from opening shelters to early warnings to neighbors helping each other out. It was a reminder that when things go south, communities need to look out for each other and not just depend on government action. And that's before something happens and afterward too. But even though the U.S. dodged the worst of it, we're still seeing some ripple effects. Those include hazardous surf and rip currents along the East Coast, and then also potential disruptions to shipping and travel. So if you haven't done a storm drill lately, things like testing your generator, double checking your food and water stockpiles, or going over your evacuation routes, now's a good time to do that, because next time all this mess happens, it could be your area that's in danger. But one of the most important things to have in a disaster and in everyday life is clean drinking water. Unfortunately, though, we can't always depend on our tap water, even during normal times. Municipal water supplies are notorious for having contaminants that can cause all sorts of long-term health problems. My family and I have been using the Cove Pure reverse osmosis system to make sure that we're drinking the healthiest water possible, and I like to thank Cove Pure for sponsoring us today. The bottom line is that sink water is one of the worst things that people consume daily, and if you want to see just how bad the water is where you live, all you need to do is go to the ewg.org website. From there, you can enter your zip code, and it'll let you see how your water supply stacks up against their guidelines for drinking water quality. And as you can see here, the report for my area doesn't look good, and that's why I always filter my water with Cove Pure. It sits right on your countertop and is always ready to use. You just plug the system in and it filters your water. The Cove Pure's clear wave reverse osmosis technology goes through 4 different layers of filtration to completely purify your water, and they're third-party lab certified to remove up to 99.9% of harmful contaminants. My family and I use our Cove Pure daily, and since we have backup solar power, we would still be able to use it even during a long-term power outage. So if you want to purify your water with the same system that my family and I use, then go to covepure.com/DIY now, or click the link in the description below to get $200 off. Next up, we have probably the biggest news story of the week, at least to folks in the US, and that's the ongoing government shutdown. This has been a thing for a little while now, but there's a very real possibility that in just a few days, millions of Americans could lose access to the food aid that they rely on to keep their families fed. As of right now, we're 28 days into a government shutdown that's become one of the longest in U.S. history. The shutdown officially began on October 1st, and while a lot of folks thought that it would just blow over in a week or two, here we are staring down the end of the month with no end in sight. And while political slap fighting might be business as usual in Washington, this time the ripple effects are about to get ugly for regular families. The big flashpoint right now is food assistance, specifically the SNAP program, food stamps, and WIC, which helps low-income families with young children. As it stands, the USDA's come out and said flat out that if the government shutdown doesn't end by November 1st, no new benefits will be going out, and that's not just a little bureaucratic threat. They've stated that funding is dried up, so everyone involved will have their backs up against a wall. As of now, there are over 40 million Americans on SNAP and nearly 7 million on WIC. So that means that around 1 in 7, 1 in 8 people in the U.S. depend on these programs to get by. Most of these folks are children, seniors, working families, and even veterans. And if these programs stop cold, for many of them, it's not just going to be a matter of cutting back on groceries. It could become a question of whether there's any food on the table at all. The USDA and state governments have already started warning recipients. In Virginia, the governor even declared a state of emergency over the looming food crisis. Food banks and pantries are already reporting a huge spike in people coming in for help, and it's not just SNAP families, but it also consists of federal workers who haven't been paid for nearly a month. Food banks just aren't set up to replace the entire federal safety net. So what happens if this isn't resolved? Hunger Free America CEO Joel Berg put it like this: "We're on the cliff of a hunger crisis of the greatest proportion in modern American history. It's a worst-case scenario. Millions of families overnight with no way to buy groceries. It's not just a matter of skipping meals or going a little hungry. For a lot of folks, it might mean making impossible choices like, do you pay rent or buy food for your kids? Do you keep lights on or do you put dinner on the table?" And it's not just the folks directly affected who are going to feel the effects of this. If over 40 million people suddenly lose food aid, you're going to see ripple effects through local economies, grocery stores, small businesses, gas stations. All those are going to take a hit. Food banks will be overwhelmed, and that's before you consider the real risk of civil unrest. When people get desperate, crime rates go up. We're already hearing warnings from community advocates who say things like people who wouldn't normally steal are going to be willing to steal food for their children. In New York, there have already been rallies and protests with people chanting, "We will not go hungry," and that's before the benefits have even stopped. Most of us have probably heard the phrase, "We're only 9 meals away from anarchy," and if this doesn't get fixed, we may see that happen live in front of us. If food insecurity rises, so does theft and other crimes of desperation. And that's not fear-mongering. That's just a reality from human nature. If things get bad enough, you could see more protests or even riots in areas where the safety net is especially thin. Then grocery stores and suppliers will lose revenue, which could mean cutbacks, layoffs, and additional economic stress in areas that are already struggling. But one thing that a lot of people don't think about is that WIC doesn't just provide food. It supports infant formula, medical referrals, and nutrition counseling. So if WIC funding stops, clinics and hospitals could see more undernourished babies and kids showing up. And to make matters worse, experts say that once benefits are cut off, even a quick resolution may not mean immediate relief. There could be lags in processing. State systems may need to be updated, and it might take days or potentially weeks for aid to start flowing again. That means even if Congress strikes a deal on November 2nd or 3rd, you could still still see a window where families are left without food. So what does all this mean for average folks, including those of us who don't rely on food aid or a federal paycheck? First, stock up while you can. If you haven't topped off your pantry or made a run to the grocery store lately, then now's the time. Also, check on your neighbors. Keep an eye out for families and seniors in your area who may be struggling, because sometimes just knowing that somebody cares and has their back can make a very big difference. Also, stay aware of what's going on around you. Watch for local developments, like some states might step in with emergency funding or set up extra food distribution points. But if people start to go hungry, increase your situational awareness to watch out for civil unrest and crime. At the end of the day, nobody likes to think about going hungry in America, but if there's one thing we know, it's that you can't count on anyone to save you, especially not stinking Congress. Next, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a couple of stories that have had impacts on both big businesses and regular folks like us. First, let's talk about what happened at LAX. On Sunday, air traffic into one of the busiest airports in the country came to a grinding halt, not because of a physical threat or because of a computer glitch, but because they just didn't have enough air traffic controllers. And the main culprit for this, you guessed it, was the ongoing government shutdown. With so many controllers working without pay and some just calling in sick, we're seeing the real world results of what happens when we don't have the people that we need behind the screens. Even after the ground stop was lifted, delays and confusion still continued through the entire system. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy warned that if this keeps up, it's only gonna get worse because people are either quitting or refusing to work overtime out of frustration. Unfortunately, though, that wasn't the only hiccup that we saw here recently. Amazon Web Services had a major cloud outage, and if you don't know, Amazon Web Services doesn't just involve internet shopping. It keeps a big portion of the web up and running. For several hours, thousands of websites and services, from banking apps to smart home gadgets, and even major airlines went down or slowed down quite a bit. And the culprit was a bug in Amazon's automated DNS management system. That basically means that some internal computer process spit out the wrong set of directions, so all these devices and services suddenly had no idea where their servers were. It took engineers hours to track it down and fix it, but by then, millions of folks had already noticed that their apps or smart gadgets had basically turned into paperweights. And while it was fixed relatively quickly, the real danger comes from the fact that the more we centralize everything into a handful of tech giants like Amazon, Microsoft, or Google, the less resilient that the entire system becomes. One glitch or one missed update, and then suddenly a third of the internet just stops working. We no longer have a decentralized internet that was built to withstand just about anything. And while most of us were cursing our dumb smart home gadgets or angry that their Faraday cage video got pushed back again because their next roll of conducted tape didn't show up on time, another kind of threat was making headlines too, and that was a cyber espionage campaign that had been running quietly in the background for over a year. This one involves F5, a big player in the world of networking hardware and cybersecurity. And if you've never heard of them, don't feel too bad, but odds are you have used something that relies on their stuff. F5 products sit quietly in the background at over 80% of Fortune 500 companies, along with plenty of US government agencies. It turns out that Chinese state-backed hackers managed to sneak into F5 systems and poke around for at least a year before anyone noticed. They made off with sensitive information, including things like source code and details about vulnerabilities that hadn't been patched yet. Even worse, they used this insider knowledge to start targeting F5's clients, including parts of the federal government. The FBI had to put out an emergency warning, and F5 had to rush out a whole series of patches to try to plug everything up. Here's a quote, though, from a security expert that stuck with me. People never hear of F5, but it's in everybody's network, and that's the scary part. Most of the tech that keeps our businesses, hospitals, and utilities online is more or less invisible until something like this happens. So what can people like us take away from all this mess? It's pretty simple. Both our physical infrastructure and our digital lives are way more fragile than any of us would like to think. Whether it's a staffing shortage at the airport, a glitch in a massive cloud provider, or hackers going where they shouldn't, it doesn't take much for our way of life to be disrupted. And to deal with all this, start by having backup plans whenever possible. Whether it's a printed copy of your flight itinerary and boarding pass, physical maps for navigation, or keeping some cash on hand for when your banking app or ATM doesn't work, never assume that the grid or the cloud will always be there. Then keep your devices updated. Keep your software and firmware up to date, because many hacks, including ones like this F5 breach, only work because people and businesses put off installing patches. Also, decentralize where you can. Don't put all your eggs in one digital basket. If you can store physical copies of important documents offline, then do that. If you use smart devices, make sure you know how to function without them, and also have some more old school backups where applicable in case those high-tech things go offline. Like, for example, we have battery operated motion sensors that we can use if our security cameras stop working. And finally, stay informed, because these aren't isolated incidents. From ransomware shutting down hospitals to supply chain attacks like SolarWinds, this stuff happens more often than most people realize, and nearly all of us are at risk in one way or another. Next, let's go over some important dates in the economy, because as we all know, if you can't afford groceries or the price of gear goes up overnight, then prepping can get a lot more difficult. And over the past week, we've had a mix of good news and bad news. The Federal Reserve is expected to cut interest rates, and that means that if all goes well, you might start to see mortgage rates, car loans, and credit card interest go down a little bit. It's not going to be by a lot, but it could be enough to maybe notice a small difference in your monthly bills. Of course, it's also important to understand that the Fed wouldn't be talking about rate cuts if the economy was absolutely jamming. What's actually happening is a slowdown. Hiring is cooling off, and jobless claims are creeping up. For regular folks, it means that we still need to watch our spending, keep an emergency fund stocked, and also not assume that cheap credit is coming back anytime soon, because it's probably not. Then we had another round of tariff drama with China. Over the past few weeks, the White House floated the idea of slapping a massive 100% tariff on everything coming out of China, and that was supposedly as leverage over rare earth minerals and high-tech exports, and that sent importers into panic mode, with different companies rushing to place spring 2026 orders way ahead of schedule just to beat possible price hikes. However, over the past couple of days, it looks like the US and China have come to an agreement that'll prevent those 100% tariffs from going into effect. But as we've all seen, the ongoing situation with these tariffs is very unstable, and it's constantly changing. And to stay ahead of everything, retailers and suppliers are now sitting on piles of extra inventory, paying through the nose for storage. And they're just basically crossing their fingers, hoping that whatever deal was supposedly made is actually going to hold. So short term, you might see prices ease up on a few big ticket items, especially if the Fed rate cuts do their job. But long term, don't count on stability, because tariff battles could mean shortages, price jumps, and empty shelves on everything from tools to electronics to even food staples. So if you've got a big purchase in mind, or there's gear that you know that you're going to need here coming up pretty soon, it might not hurt to just go ahead and get it, just in case the next round of tariffs or supply chain hiccups lands right before you need it. But when it comes to preparedness, you'll go a lot further if you spend your money on what's important. So if you want to see the first $1,000 that a new prepper should spend, then click here. Or if you want to see backup lighting methods that would be useful for long-term fall and winter power outages, then click here. Once again, I'd like to thank Cove Pure for sponsoring us today. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.